Jamestown was founded in 1607. The Puritans left England months before and have finally made it to the New World. What they have come to find is not what they had expected. Famine, disease, and tribes constantly fighting. The settlement of this colony still causes a spark. More and more people from all over begin to come and settle in the New World. 1607, Jamestown, Virginia. King James I granted a charter to a group of London entrepreneurs, the Virginia Company, to establish a satellite English settlement in the Chesapeake region. Jamestown was considered America's first permanent English colony. The colony was sponsored by the Virginia Company, a group of investors who hoped to profit from the venture. The expedition was led by Captain Christopher Newport. On May 13th, after 2 weeks of exploration, they anchored in the James River. The passengers came ashore the next day and began the settlement in winter of 1609. Only 60 of the original 214 settlers of Jamestown survived because of starvation. In June 1609, the survivors abandoned Jamestown. Lord Delaware soon revived the colony. By 1619, the General Assembly met in response to orders of the Virginia Company. Their goal was to establish one equal and uniformed government over all of Virginia, which will provide just laws for the happy guiding and governing of the people there inhabiting. The next crucial event that begins to play a large role in the development of America was the arrival of Africans to Jamestown, when a Dutch slave trader exchanged his cargo of Africans for food. The Africans soon became indentured servants for Englishmen.
1620, Massachusetts. The Plymouth Colony, America's first permanent Puritan settlement, was established by English separatist Puritans in December 1620. The Pilgrims left England to seek religious freedom, or simply to find a better life. After a period in Holland, they set sail from Plymouth, England, on September 16, 1620. Aboard the Mayflower, its 102 passengers spending 65 days at sea. Chief of the Wampanoag Indians, who signed a peace treaty with the Pilgrims. Squanto, another English-speaking Indian, acted as guide and interpreter, and with his help, the colonists learned to plant corn, catch fish, and gather fruit. The Pilgrims invited the Indians to celebrate their first harvest in 1621, an event now celebrated as Thanksgiving. After Massasoit's death, the Wampanoag joined a tribe coalition to eliminate English settlers. But in the ensuing King Philip's War, the Wampanoag were nearly exterminated. The colony gradually grew in size, and the original settlement, known as the Plymouth Plantation, expanded as settlers built houses in the area. Plymouth Colony retained its independence for over 70 years, and by 1691 its population exceeded 7,000. It was integrated with Massachusetts Bay Company's much larger colony to establish, the Royal Colony of Massachusetts, now the state of the same name.
New York, 1626. In 1626, the Dutch purchased the island of Manhattan from the Indians, which later became the colony of New Amsterdam. New Amsterdam separated the English colonies of the New England from the other English colonies in the south. England's Charles II claimed all the Dutch land, and in 1664 was transferred to his brother, the Duke of York. Thus, in 1664, New Amsterdam became New York.
1629, Maryland. In 1629, George Calvert, 1st Lord Baltimore in the Irish House of Lords, fresh from his failure further north with Newfoundland's Avalon colony, applied to Charles I for a new royal charter for what was to become the province of Maryland. Calvert's interest in creating a colony derived from his Catholicism in his desire for the creation of a haven for Catholics in the New World. In addition, he was familiar with the fortunes that had been made in tobacco in Virginia, and hoped to recoup some of the financial losses he had sustained in his earlier colonial venture in Newfoundland. George Calvert died in April 1632, but a charter for Maryland colony was granted to his son Cecilius Calvert, 2nd Lord Baltimore, on June 20th, 1632. The new colony was named Maryland in honor of Henrietta Maria, Queen Consort of Charles I.
Rhode Island, 1636. In 1636, Roger Williams founded the city Providence and declared it a place of religious freedom after he was kicked out of Massachusetts. In 1644, that the cities of Portsmouth and Newport came together to officially become the colony of Rhode Island?
Connecticut, 1636. Connecticut was first explored by the Dutch. In 1633, Dutch traders purchased the land from the Pequot and made the first permanent settlement. In 1635, the first English settlers arrived and were considerably helped by the Indians. In 1637, there was a war, the Pequot War. Native Indians in Connecticut included Narragansetts, Mohegans, Wampanoags, Nipmucks, Pocumtucks, and many more. The Pequots were defeated by the colonists who were led by John Underhill, John Mason, and the Narragansetts and Mohegans who were their allies. During the time of 1675 through 1677, King Philip's War was fought between the English and the Metacomet of the Wampanoag tribe. The war was bloody and bitterly fought by the colonists against the Wampanoags, Narragansetts, Nipmucks, and many other Indian tribes. During King Philip's War, up to one-third of America's white population was wiped out. The war proved to be the final struggle by the Native Americans of Connecticut.
Delaware, 1631. The first settlement in the territory that afterward became Delaware was made by the Dutch in 1631, who were sent by De Vries, a noted Dutch colonizer and one of the patroons of New Amsterdam. Between 30 and 40 colonists settled on the Delaware Bay near the site of Lewes, but they were led into a foolish quarrel with the Indians and were massacred to the last man. The quarrel began from a most trivial cause. The Dutch had set up a tin plate bearing the arms of Holland. An Indian, without knowing its meaning, thoughtlessly destroyed it. The Dutch considered this an insult to their nation and demanded that the offender be given up. This began the trouble which resulted in the destruction of the whole colony. When De Vries came the following year to visit his colony, he found nothing but heaps of ashes and charred bones. The conquest of New Amsterdam by the English in 1664 included Delaware, which now became the property of the Duke of York. The Duke's laws, framed by Nichols for New York, were at length extended to Delaware, and the people were granted some measure of self-government. In 1682, however, the year of the founding of Pennsylvania, the Duke sold Delaware to William Penn, and the colony, which became known as the Three Lower Counties, or the Territories, was the same year annexed to Pennsylvania.
New Hampshire, 1638. In 1638, a settlement was made at Exeter between the Piscataqua and Merrimack rivers by John Wheelwright, the brother-in-law of Mrs. Hutchinson, who had been banished from Massachusetts. These little towns had come into existence, each independent of the others. None of them had a stable government, and there was constant discord and turbulence. In 1639, the towns formed an agreement to unite, but as Massachusetts claimed this territory, the towns at length agreed to come under her jurisdiction. The Union was formed in 1641, the people of the settlements retaining liberty to manage their town affairs, and each town was permitted to send a deputy to the General Court at Boston. New Hampshire continued a part of Massachusetts until 1679, when the king separated them. He joined them again in 1686, but they were finally separated in 1691, and New Hampshire again became a royal province, the president and council being appointed by the Crown and the Assembly, elected by the people. Until 1741, however, the governor was but a lieutenant under the supervision of the governor of Massachusetts. New Hampshire grew very slowly for many years. North and South Carolina, 1663. Originally, South and North Carolina were one state. The Carolina colony started in 1663. Charles II of England granted a large amount of land that would become the Carolina region. He gave this land to 8 noblemen. The name Carolina is Latin for the name Charles. Carolina stretched from the southern tip of Virginia all the way to what is now northern Florida, and as westward as the western seas. Later, the colony split into 2 separate colonies that would become South and North Carolina. They split due to the difficulty of governing such a large colony when getting orders from the South took so long to travel to the South. Also, the trade between the North and South was harder. Also, due to cultural differences, they split in 1712. New Jersey, 1655. By 1664, the British take control of New Jersey from the Dutch. Between the years of 1676 and 1702, New Jersey is divided into the East Jersey and West Jersey, and eventually combined to become one colony. By 1656, the 7 Years' War began. It ended in 1763 due to disputes over land, won by Great Britain. France gives England all French territory east of Mississippi River, except New Orleans. The Spanish give up East and West Florida to the English in return for Cuba.
Pennsylvania was founded by William Penn on March 4, 1681. This was declared to them by a royal charter granted to them by King Charles II. Pennsylvania was home to Delaware, Susquehannock, Iroquois, Erie, Shawnee, and other Native American tribes. Most tribes were driven off as a result of the European colonization. Pennsylvania was colonized by Dutch and Swedish settlers. In 1664, the English took over the colony, and William Penn established a colony based on religious tolerance. Philadelphia and Pennsylvania were settled by many Quakers.
Georgia was founded in 1732. James Oglethorpe was granted a charter to found Georgia. Georgia was named after King George II, King of England. Georgia was originally included in the Carolina patent granted to Lord Clarendon and his people. Georgia was originally a region that was wild and unoccupied. The king could therefore choose to re-grant the territory to who he wanted. Spain at this time wanted to claim it as Florida. James Oglethorpe was a philanthropist. He organized a plan for planting a colony in America. The colony soon began its own, now being named Georgia.
The founding of all the colonies is done, and the 7 Years' War breaks out in Europe. Tension spilling over into the new founded colonies, and they renamed the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War was fought in the colonies, and the war was fought between the British and France. In the colonies, the French and Indians were allies against the British. Because of the war ending in 1770, the people eventually began to rise up against the British, which will later become the American Revolution.